Okay, so I think we're at 2 o'clock now, so I'll get started. So thanks for joining us today. We're really thrilled to be able to welcome all of our Disrupt-ATHON teams and other audience members to Responsible Disruption and our 12th Innovation Table Zoomcast. My name is James Gamage, and I'm the Director of Innovation and the Social Impact Lab at the United Way of Calgary and area.
And my name's, that's okay, I can go. And my name's Monique Blau, and I'm the Director of Strategy and Design at J5, a Calgary-based innovation firm. And I'll hand it over to Gabrielle to introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Gabrielle, and I'm a designer at the Social Impact Lab, and I've been working on putting the Disrupt-ATHON together for all of you. The Disrupt-ATHON is a multi-day event where teams are going to be working together to come up with concepts for how we can responsibly disrupt the food system. At the end of this Zoomcast, I'll be providing you guys with some information about exactly how the Disrupt-ATHON is going to work. So if you're interested, I will encourage you to stay tuned for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Gabrielle. And just before we begin today, I would like to acknowledge that we're currently gathered on land adjacent to where the Bow River meets the Elbow River. The traditional Blackfoot name of this place is Mohintis, which we now call the city of Calgary. This is traditional land of Blackfoot Confederacy, as well as Treaty 7 territory, which includes Kainai, Siksika, Piikani, Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda nations. We would also like to recognize the Métis people and the Inuit people who have made their home here in Calgary. With the sad events that continue to unfold today, where we learn, listen, and take action, we cannot remain silent. We stand against racism and intolerance in any form. We believe everyone deserves to live in equitable communities that are built on inclusion, diversity, understanding, and tolerance. At the Social Impact Lab, we strive to put people first, to create a diverse and inclusive community and culture where everyone feels safe and valued. We have a few housekeeping items to cover today. We are, of course, recording this session, so you'll be able to share it with your colleagues and friends, and we will email you the link to where you can find the session in a couple days. You'll also be able to find it on our YouTube channel. Our next Responsible Disruption Zoomcast is Wednesday, July 15th at 2 p.m. And this is a special episode where the teams participating in our Disrupt-ATHON will have an opportunity to share their formed ideas with a panel of experts. You can register on Eventbrite and continue to watch our social channels for more details. Our agenda for today includes, of course, introductions of our guests, lively table conversation, questions from our audience, and the launch, of course, of our food system Disrupt-ATHON. The pandemic and lockdown have completely upended life in Calgary and has revealed holes in our food system, which needs to become more resilient and responsive to the needs of Calgarians. And although there is a tremendous amount of positive work being done in our communities, even before the pandemic, over 66,000 children access the food bank every year. And we ask ourselves, why during this day and age, and with such a wealthy city like Calgary, is this problem unsurmountable? For this reason, we've decided to create our food system Disrupt-ATHON, focused on finding solutions to the problems identified, but also in bringing Calgary community together to solve a problem that is real and will have impact and significance to the well-beings of countless Calgarians. So what is the food system? Well, in the simplest form, a food system is a chain of events that connect the farmer to the consumer. And we've identified 4 areas based on academia: production, planting, growing, raising, and harvesting of the food; processing, and this refers altering the raw food states into something that we can consume, like preserving; milling; distribution, this is the set of processes which takes us, from the food on its way to the food producer, to the processor, to us, the consumer; and lastly, consumption. And this refers to the act of eating and enjoyment of food. And it also includes education. We are publishing a number of How Might We questions on Open City. And these How Might We questions are a way to frame ideation and is the process we actively use in the Social Impact Lab. And on the slide you see in front of you, that's going to switch momentarily, these are the how might we's that we will start to explore today. And we hope that these questions offer some inspiration as you listen to and engage with our guests. As Gabrielle said, this Zoomcast kicks off our 5-day Disrupt-ATHON. And the discussion we're going to have today with 3 important players in the food system. They will give us insight around the challenges that the food system has faced in the last few months and how extraordinary Calgarians have stepped up to help explore and improve the food system for Calgary's least privileged families and for those that are experiencing change during this time of COVID. Just a reminder, this is an interactive conversation, so we look forward to your engagement at the Q&A panel at the bottom of your Zoom.
Okay. So I have the pleasure of introducing our panel this week, and they're all immersed in the issue of food, its production, distribution, and consumption. So our first guest is Jean-Claude Munyezamu. Jean-Claude grew up in Rwanda before moving to Canada in the 1990s. He is the founder and executive director of Soccer Without Boundaries, a grassroots organization that works with the community to bring about social and economic change. Soccer Without Boundaries helps immigrant and low-income families get involved in the community through after-school programs, soccer clubs, leadership camps, tutoring, adult engagement, and community events. Jean-Claude is recipient of the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal for his work and was a finalist for the 2019 Immigrant of Distinction Awards. In 2018, Jean-Claude received the Western Legacy Award for Innovation and was also named one of 20 most compelling Calgarians. He was a member of the Premier's Council on Culture and the Arts and currently serves on the community-based Public Safety Task Force for the City of Calgary. Our next guest is Julie Van Rosendaal. Julie is the Calgary-based author of 11 best-selling cookbooks. She has been the food columnist on the Calgary Eye-Opener on CBC Radio 1 for 14 years, is the contributing food editor for the Globe and Mail, and for the past 20 years has been a freelance food writer and columnist for other publications across Canada. Julie hosts a Canadian food podcast called Crispy Bits, and she teaches, speaks, and cooks at culinary schools and events across the country. She has a very engaged audience on her social media channels and recipe website, Dinner with Julie. Finally, we have Sasha Musij. Sasha is Director of Agribusiness Market Development and the part of the Agriculture Centre of Expertise at ATB Financial. Sasha's role with ATB is focused on developing new markets within the agribusiness and agri-food sectors. He works with clients, prospects, and collaborators to find creative solutions that enable these businesses to launch and expand their business. Prior to joining ATB, Sasha worked with Calgary Economic Development as the Business Development Manager for Agribusiness. So welcome to you all. Looking forward to a great discussion this afternoon. And just to reiterate what Monique said earlier, we want this to be as interactive as possible. So we're inviting the audience, as usual, to put questions in the question box at the bottom of your Zoom bar menu at the bottom of the page. So please do that, and myself and Monique will relay those questions onto the panel, and we'll hopefully have a lively discussion get going. But in the meantime, while we're waiting for your questions, we're going to ask a few questions ourselves. And the first thing that we wanted to focus on is ordinary Calgarians doing extraordinary things. And since the lockdown and the pandemic starting in March, we've seen that in Calgary. We've seen some amazing acts by ordinary Calgarians. And Julie, I just wanted to start with you. If you have any favourite stories in the last few months of ordinary Calgarians doing extraordinary things in the food system.
Oh, well, Jean-Claude is definitely one of my favorite Calgarians doing extraordinary things, but he's been doing great things for a while. It's really been interesting to see how people have responded to this pandemic and how they've really started to look out for each other in their own communities. And one of my favorite examples is a couple of teachers in Bowness. So Megan and Tanya, who I believe are here, they're teachers at Beaucroft School in Bowness, which is a very diverse area of the city, higher needs in terms of school support. And the day after schools closed, of course, the closure of schools and of youth groups, boys and girls clubs, rec centers, churches, cuts off access to kids who rely on breakfast and lunch programs at school to eat every day. And so they jumped into action the day after schools closed and started distributing lunches at their school from their parking lot at school. They've been doing it ever since. They established a group that's now called the Bonus Food Network that incorporates some other sort of grassroots organizations, and they're doing 200 lunches a day in Bonus. And yeah, so that's just one of many great stories I've heard so far. It's really interesting how, like Monique said, it's really, this pandemic has revealed some weaknesses and some gaps in the food system, and people are just identifying them and acting as best they can and filling that need.
You'll be pleased to know that on the Q&A, Megan has just said that she is here. That's great. So Jean-Claude, if I can come to you now. So Julie has already said about your own organization, Soccer Without Boundaries, which is a wonderful organization that was initially focused on providing an after-school soccer program, as far as I understand it, to kids, but it's become so much more than that. Can you tell us about the broader programming that you have within Soccer Without Boundaries, and particularly focused on food?
Thank you very much. Yes, we were just organization with the youth. We had soccer, because soccer brings people together, and we had music. What was lacking was food. And when school shut down, because of connection we had with the families, we had about 700 kids in our database. We knew that some families will be very vulnerable. I started because of one woman, one mother of the boy in our program. She had a baby just 3 days before. And when it was locked down, I knew that she doesn't drive. She has other 2 small children. And church was closed, the food bank closed, everything closed. We have experience of living in a war zone. Usually what's happened when war starts, you don't know when it's gonna end, no matter what they tell you. Also, when you know where your neighbor is hiding, you are responsible for that neighbor. So that's how we started. We started basically with her, then we realized there are many people also who need. Then eventually we found out actually there is an entire community that is forgotten in this food system. African communities, really, food bank don't have anything for them, you know, and we have a very diverse diet. Also, when you go to major grocery store here, you don't find them, but there's a small store that sells those stuff. So what we did is I reached out to some of those businesses. There's one, she was ready to close down because the clients were not there. So we started, instead of giving only food we find here, we started delivering food, diet for people. Basically, if you're from Nigeria, you're gonna have pound yam. If you're from Kenya, you're gonna have corn flour. From Rwanda or Congo, you're gonna have your cassava flour, and so on. We have about 17 flour we gave to those families. At the same time, every week we deliver close to 300 hampers. And we also put spaghetti always. And we've been teaching people basically how to cook spaghetti, and they love it. By just standing outside and tell people, you know, this is what you do. Just try it. We have said in our program that when you make a mistake, nobody gonna die. Just, you know, go in the kitchen and do this and this. And we have reported that really people, they love it. And each time when you introduce new food in the family, our children win. So This is what we've been doing, and I have more than 10 volunteers who come to deliver every week. We're doing delivery for two reasons. Number one, we have people who live in public housing. If we can help people not to go out much, we can keep also this virus away from these communities, because if you see what's happening in nursing home, if virus come into these communities, it's just devastating. And we managed to mount volunteers, and we just deliver food to people, and we've been doing that since March 16th, and still going.
Some fabulous stories there around, which basically started with helping thy neighbor, and it you know, it's such a basic thing which has blossomed into something so big for you guys. How many families or how many people are you serving with your services at the moment? Yeah.
We are serving 296 families, and again, if someone get a job, they send me email. Right now I receive email of 2 families say, you know, thank you very much, we got a job. You can just pick another family to deliver food to, and thank you, we appreciate that. Our list changed every day. So we have 296 families. Tomorrow we might have 300 or 250. Basically, we also help people to fill out those applications if it's EI, if it's those emergency help, if it's whatever they need, basically, even helping them to get a job. So basically, we ended up doing almost everything during pandemic. And again, neighbors are coming to help. Being connected to people has been a huge asset. For example, assessing who need what. We use the children in our program. Because we connected with them, the kids are the one who say, okay, so-and-so had a baby yesterday. Then we know that they need their diapers, okay? And they are responsible to know the changes in neighborhood, who is sick, okay? Then we have papers we give to them, okay, where they're gonna write what address, how many children, what changes in the family. Basically, it has been a very interesting learning. So the number of family we serve depends. For example, taxi drivers are going back to work. So they don't need our help anymore, some of them. And the other, actually, they are starting losing jobs because of during pandemic, there's time when everybody was hiring. Those people are returning to their work, and those people again are losing job again. So yeah, this is how we basically, it's kind of developing as we go.
Can I jump in for a sec?
Yeah, of course.
Jean-Claude, can you describe you have a physical hub, a Calgary housing unit that you use as a sort of a food bank. There's a little kitchen in there that's been approved by Alberta Health Services. So some of the community members come in and cook. Can you tell us a little bit about how it looks?
Yes, the way it started, we had a lot of bananas. They were going to go to the west. So the lady who is in charge with food hampers, she's a mother in neighborhood. She has children in the program. She was my volunteer for 5 years. I knew that she would be very good to have this job. So what she did, we have people in the community who used to be professional bakers, professional in everything. So we had these huge bananas that were going to waste. So she said, no, wait a second. We have an oven, we have everything. So, well, yes, we have those professional women who live in the community. You never know if they know anything. So they came and bake banana bread, and we filled our fridges, and yeah. So basically, the entire community celebrated. Yes, we do have the physical location. It's a very small space because we get food in the morning and we get rid of food end of the day. However, it's been wonderful. It's before we used to run the program into this house, whether it's tutoring kids, whether it was storage for soccer staff, whether women programs, and now it's basically a food bank.
It's so great.
Yeah,
and
no, it sounds it.
In the community, and the doors are open, and it's serving a community it's a great example of that food security work happening in your community. I'm getting all goosebumpy just hearing you talk about it.
That's great.
Thank you.
We've already got a number of questions coming in, but before we get to those, and we will get to those, and that, some of them are congratulating Jean-Claude with the amazing work that he's doing, but also asking some questions about it. I want to bring in Sasha. So Sasha, you work at ATB in the agri-food business. What have you seen in that side of the business, in that end of the supply chain, so to speak, in the production and maybe processing end of the supply chain? How have businesses been innovating their offerings, maybe even before the pandemic or maybe during the pandemic itself?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I'm glad, James, that you bring up the point of before the pandemic. As it relates to kind of food security, food sovereignty, and our food supply chain, this has been a hot topic. I mean, for as long as we can think of, but really a hot topic over the last couple of years and kind of a budding ecosystem in Western Canada. And so what I've found is to these industry players and the companies, the innovators, is that COVID really just accelerated a lot of it. It put eyes on the supply chain. We knew there were some challenges in the supply chain and how it delivers, how it distributes, how it even processes. And typically to address those issues, capital is one of the biggest needs. And it was always a fight to say where capital should go. COVID hits, it highlights the stress of our food ecosystem. And it started to direct people that way. And so what I really saw over the last 3 months is innovation accelerating in this space. Everything from food safety and traceability right through to local production. We're seeing more indoor farms show up. We've obviously got urban and community farms that are out there. It's the right time of the year. It's been a rainy year, so that's been good for our produce. It's starting to come up off the ground, but the innovations have been really interesting. And similarly, we saw the retail network and whatnot over the last 2 to 3 years start denoting more of their shelf space to that local supply. Again, COVID just is going to ramp that up, because as those supply issues became a concern, if we were worried about how much we're importing from the US and if that border ever got shut down on food, could we supply it domestically? Fact of the matter is we can in a lot of cases. And then that was exemplified because you had the quick service industry absolutely get decimated, right? We weren't able to go to the restaurants and whatnot. So you had this glut of food that would have typically been going to the consumer through the restaurants. It had to find its place elsewhere. And we did see a pretty good infusion into the food banks and whatnot where it could be on the perishables, but it also started moving into the feed side of the world. So, the food that our food eats and that kind of side. And so it's just been really interesting to see how the supply chain has tried to pivot. Some successfully, others with some more challenges, just because it started to also put some light on the fact that this is a very paper heavy industry. Everything happens on paper. And so in order to quickly digitally change, you've got to get that online and in a data way. And so that's been kind of the things that we're watching right now. As far as solutions and what's coming out, again, I think it's a lot of these solutions were being developed. It's just we're now moving into it. An example of a company that was working on food traceability for safety reasons, really. And they recognized the processing issue of COVID. If you've got 500 people in one building, as we saw in the beef case anyways, it really was a big hiccup. And these guys took their system and were able to revamp it into a COVID tracking system, so we could do some monitoring on staff from their temperature through to any of the issues they have. And this would all be digitized. So now we can start to map out what everybody looks like and where a source of COVID might be and that kind of thing. They took a traceability technology and rinsed and repeated it into the safety technology now. That's the kind of innovation that we've been seeing.
Right, it's great to hear that people are thinking about that at the supply, the production and processing and supply end as well. So that's fantastic. So I'm going to go to some questions because we have a number in the question box at the moment. First off, just a statement actually from Megan. It's a message to Jean-Claude. This is a significant effort making a huge impact on these families. So thanks, Jean-Claude. Also, Patty asks, what role can commercial operators like grocery stores play in this process? That's to Jean-Claude, I think, for the work at Soccer Without Boundaries.
Number one is keeping track of how the neighborhood is changing, how demography is changing. Having those diversity into their food system, that's one. The second is throwing away food. It's a problem, everybody knows. I have a different grocery store in neighborhood where basically, you know, this food can be rescued every evening and going into the neighborhood just nearby rather than across town. Another is also hiring people in the neighborhood. That's another thing, and listen to them, because when you see how many people here, talking about the African communities here, you can go to superstore and you find nothing, okay? And yet when you go to these little things in Northeast, somewhere, you're gonna find 17, 18 different kind of foods, really that are not represented in the mainstream. I don't know if I can say it's ignorant, but they are losing out on business.
Okay, cool.
I'll add to that too, just because I've seen a bit of that work, and we've talked to the retailers to kind of understand what are the challenges they've had, and you know, if there is a glut of food, how does that move around? And there's an organization that I advise with called I Can for Kids, who worked with Save On to essentially figure out how to get food to everybody, because their program is different. I won't go into the depth of their program, but an interesting kind of solution was, because we knew everybody couldn't go to the grocery store for multiple reasons, both on their own side and then because of the pandemic itself, how do we get this food delivered to them, right? And it might not always be the food package, so gift cards were brought up and whatnot. So I have seen the retailers try to look at creative ways to support community initiative in a new world as it sits. To Jean-Claude's point, I think consumer choice is still a challenge, especially in the mainstream players.
I can add to that. About delivering food, there is the local organizations, okay? That's another thing where grocery store, they have to be aware of those grassroots organizations in their networks. So it's because delivering food is very easy if you have a grassroots organizations, because they also know who need what. For example, right now we have some families who, there's some food we don't give. Some families, they call us, we have volunteers go there and take money and go to buy food they want and deliver them to neighborhood. Basically, this is what we are doing, but explaining to grocery store, you have to talk to headquarters somewhere in Toronto in order to do that. Again, decision making, if they are on the local area, I think that it would be wonderful when it's come to food delivery.
I've got another question actually here from Kabita. So this is actually, it might be for Sasha first actually. So thank you for your wonderful works. I'm just wondering about community and private farms and kitchen gardening. Owing to the extreme harsh winter we have in Calgary, how does the idea of growing your own food and farm works if we were to inculcate the idea of balcony farming? So the idea of balcony farming or homegrown food, have we, is that thought about with regard to the supply chain at all?
Yeah, it's funny actually. I was actually thinking about this because there's a local play and a local supply side, then there's the global food system. We'd be naive to believe that one can survive without the other. We can't grow everything, to the comment here around, winter. We can't grow everything all year round. Now we can, and we're seeing innovations move towards that with indoor growing. And I've even seen it down to household scale opportunities. So something that looks like a fridge essentially that can grow all the produce that you choose. You kind of work with that. There are companies in Calgary that are designing these systems. But to have total food sovereignty on this, I mean, we need supply of all these different food options. Again, building off of Jean-Claude's perspective, there's some products that we don't even sell here, let alone grow here. So there is to some extent, an ability to supply domestically, be it at your own balcony, in your community garden, or a bit more broad. But it does have a cap as we see it. The next piece of it is it's costly. It's much more costly to have a system grow your product than it is to put it in the ground and try to go through that system, because that's been out there for generations, and we've been able to kind of become more efficient. So there's no easy answer here by any means. We're definitely seeing innovation drive towards a personalized supply of food. But it's a little bit futuristic, you know, and it's interesting because you hear that where these innovations come from, it's space travel. If we want to go and look into living in Mars, we need to be able to produce food in an environment that doesn't allow for it. Those innovations have spurred out, and now you're seeing it kind of to get there. And again, Calgary companies and Alberta companies are part of those discussions.
Yeah, I remember seeing Matt Damon trying to grow produce on Mars. That was I love that. Monique, do you want to?
Well, I'm wondering if Julie wants to add anything, because I know we've seen a lot of spaces around even restaurants that are growing their own, but I'm curious what your take is.
We're seeing definitely a lot more people learning what they can grow in their backyards. And I think consumer perspective is really shifting through this pandemic. We're really seeing people pay attention to the source of their food, noticing the financial impact of supporting local growers and local restaurants, local producers, versus going and buying a pineapple or some kiwi. We're so used to getting anything we want, you know, any time of the year. And so disconnected from seasonality. So I think consumer perspectives are changing. We're starting to pay more attention to food waste, for sure, and being more resilient, self-reliant. We saw that with everyone baking sourdough, learning how to bake, learning how to grow their own food, starting to learn about CSAs, community supported agriculture. All the ones across Alberta have been sold out. They're just, you know, doing great. Just that idea of building a relationship with your farmer, spin farmers tapping into residential land. I think Christy Peters is here as a participant. She works for the city in sustainability and is working on urban garden projects. But yeah, it's definitely something that people, even with small spaces, are learning that they can grow spinach and greens and herbs on their balcony in a container, which is great to see.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a question from Gina that I think fits perfectly for you, Julie, because you and I have both been involved in brown bagging for kids. And her question is really around, where do we see organizations like Brown Bagging for Kids, the Community Kitchen, Soup Sisters, fitting into this?
Yes.
And her question also goes one a little bit further is, was there a coordinated effort to bring these groups together to meet the needs before we look at one-off projects being launched? Last part of this is, will these mini food banks and COVID food launch programs wind down? So I can go back to them as we work through them.
Yeah, I think that's a question. I think Jean-Claude will probably have some thoughts on this as well. And I worked closely with Brown Bagging It from the beginning. They're one of the first people that I called Tanya and Stephanie when schools closed to see what, and it's been such a unique situation. And a lot of the breakdowns, of course, there's been breakdowns in production and processing, but distribution has been a big challenge with COVID, right? So all those small community groups that previously made, for example, lunches for Brown Bagging, their downtown kitchen was closed. I'm not sure if Tanya is here or anyone from Brown Bagging, but in the past they relied on restaurants, which of course were closed, community groups, church groups, and then their own kitchen and their volunteers. So we saw a lot of those agencies have to reset and rethink their systems, right? And how to work with their volunteer bases, how to operate safely under COVID protocols, how to distribute to their clients, as the common term. And so everyone sort of figured it out on their own, but there have been a lot of meetings throughout COVID between all the organizations. And I've been involved in some of them, many of them, and sort of comparing notes. What are your obstacles? How can we help each other? And I know there is a lot of that there's some competitiveness in this realm. So I think working together is key for sure. I think people had to operate so quickly, jump in so quickly to meet these needs before, so to say, was our coordinated effort to meet the needs before one-off projects were launched. You know, in response to this sort of crisis, you see these grassroots initiatives sort of pop up when they see an immediate need. And when kids are hungry, when communities are hungry, you sort of have to act now and then figure it out as we go along how we can work together to support each other. And I think we've done a pretty good job across the board. There's been a lot of, maybe they're temporary projects, maybe they will, I have been involved in lunch distribution. And so to give a little bit of background about what I've been doing, when we saw the closure of all these restaurant kitchens, the kitchens themselves were allowed to continue to operate, but the dining rooms were closed. So we tapped into the kitchen at Rouge and activated it as a kitchen that's been approved by Alberta Health Services, that has people with safe food handling practices in place, as a place to prepare food to distribute to the communities that we're distributing to the people. So there's that, where do you produce the food, and then how do you reach the kids? Primarily has been our focus, because there are a lot of resources for adults. There's been, of course, financial relief, gift cards, CRB, but kids who relied on breakfast and lunch programs at school don't have a lot of options. So we've seen a lot of those community groups popping up at, initially, they were at schools. The rules sort of changed in terms of accessing community buildings, community association buildings. So that's sort of been evolving throughout this pandemic. I think I just went off on a tangent. So yeah, I'm not sure how they will evolve, if they'll wind down. It'll be curious from a school perspective, if breakfast and lunch programs will continue to operate in schools in the fall. I'm not sure anybody knows that yet. So all these sort of small community grassroots initiatives are sort of figuring things out along the way. And then the larger agencies are also sort of figuring out how to best serve their communities during this time of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer at all?
No, absolutely. And I think, for Gina, we can also respond, because the Social Impact Lab has been involved in a lot of work and a lot of conversations with different agencies. We know the Alex is doing a lot of work, as are a number of other agencies. And I think Heather is actually here, and I see a few of her questions come up. We have a lot of questions from the audience, so I'm just trying to navigate through some of these. But I think it would be worth, at the beginning of our conversation today, I introduced a few how might we's, and some of the questions that we've received definitely speak to those. But these how might we's are a way that we reimagine what might be possible. And, when someone talked about the balconies, could we grow food there? I know the Alex has a garden. Restaurants are reusing their space in different ways to grow food. I'm curious, and maybe Sasha, this could go to you to start, but when we think about the high vacancy rate in our city, is there an opportunity there? If we look at the how might we better use vacant real estate in Calgary to increase our locally produced food, what might that look like? And any thoughts there?
Yeah, this is an interesting one, and I'm glad that Julie brought up Christy Peters' name in this, because her and I have been on this topic for over 5 years now. And I think, yes, the short answer to that, yes, there is. There's a way to repurpose our real estate. The catch is that this kind of indoor production is industrial in nature, and it works well in warehouses and that kind of commercial real estate, not necessarily in downtown office style real estate. And there's so much to that. There's the logistics and the economics, having trucks running in and out, having a semi-trailer drive around a one-way street downtown, hugely challenging. And so some of that distribution model needs to be amended. Now, how do we get there? I think it's collaboration that's a big part of this, because purely as an industry or a corporate play, the economics typically don't work out. So there needs to be some type of subsidy nature to that, and how we work with the communities, be it the municipality, the province, the feds, or whatever. Now, what's interesting is you're seeing the province, the federal government, and even the cities garner and get themselves behind food strategies. So there's something there, and it continues to go down that way. For me, I think the real estate works better in delivering innovation that can then be executed outside of the downtown. But that said, I know people that are looking at floors and ways to innovate those floors in such a way, either to bring in the innovators so they can ideate and work like the social lab does, or actually utilize that real estate. Other organizations are definitely looking at some of the restaurants. There is going to be restaurant capacity or kitchen capacity out there. How do we cooperate in using that in a way this way? Other people are looking at ways of doing culinary co-working type of opportunities, where we're bringing people, chefs, and everybody together to one spot where they can all work together and ideate and spill out those ideas, and then hopefully graduate out of that and start taking up more real estate, right? We have to be very thoughtful. And the last thing I'll leave it with is that thoughtful piece. It's not a one and done type situation. It's not done overnight. This is something that takes 5-10 years to really build out. You can see benefit really quickly, but to truly build it out and have it lasting, it needs a vision that goes much beyond even an electoral term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks for that. I think it is very complex, which I think is why it's also taking us so much time. And, you know, Christy's work, I think we're all quite familiar with it, and we continue to drive that forward. I'm curious too, if we could maybe talk a bit about food waste, because of course, one of our How Might We's is always around food waste. And we had a question from our audience from Kavita, which is around zero food waste. And Julie, she specifically wants this question to go to you. So do you have anything in mind pertinent to zero food waste? Something along the lines of cookbooks, recipes, focusing on using edible stems, leaves, the skins of fruits and vegetables?
Sorry, I know I was going to do that at some point. I'm scrolling through the questions. These questions are so great. Yeah, I've been, I am my father's daughter. I've been pushing against food waste for a long, long time. And so I'm sure everyone here knows the statistics around it. I mean, the truth of the matter is a lot of it happens on the production side. A lot of it happens in the distribution part. It's not a lot of it is at home, you know, and a lot of it has to do with education, knowing what to use, what you have, instead of going backwards and thinking, oh, I saw this recipe on Pinterest. Oh, I'm in the mood for, we're so spoiled when it comes to food, and thinking, those of us who live with food security, you know, what do you want to have for dinner, rather than looking at what we have and knowing what to do with it. So I think education is key. I've thought for a long time of doing a website called Waste Not, although I think that's taken now, because there's just so much, right? Sort of a choose your own adventure. Type in what you have, and some suggestions come back. I think a lot of people have learned throughout this pandemic, not being able to run to the grocery store for some cilantro, not wanting to waste anything, having to cook all our meals at home. We've collectively been cooking more than ever before. We sort of take for granted that we could grab a muffin and a coffee, or, you know, whatever. And so I think we've learned a lot already about how to use what we have. But yeah, I think a cookbook, or I think a website would be maybe better, because we could add to it. There wouldn't be that obstacle for people who might not be able to afford to buy a book. But I think food waste is definitely a huge part of it. And learning about ways to purchase your food, like through a CSA, where, you know, you have that relationship with your farmer. They know exactly how much to harvest, so you don't have that waste from over harvesting to go to the farmer's market. But yeah, in terms of redistributing food, we've seen a lot of food from restaurant closures, from, you know, State Culinary Arts program donated 10,000 pounds to the Leftovers Foundation. So seeing where it goes, how much is wasted when it's donated sort of on its last legs, that's sort of a huge problem for the final recipient of that food. A lot of it, you know, especially produce, is beyond use. So yeah, sorry, I'm going to stop talking about that. I think that's a huge part of it. And I agree that needs to be addressed.
So
Well,
that sounds
and
like,
I'll just add into, like, I mean, we've seen it as industry as well, trying to say, okay, what do we do with this? Is there a way to value add the food waste, not even just at the consumer
Yeah.
level, but through the distribution channels? And you know, probably the brewery industry is the one that is the best example here with spent grains. I've seen it go into natural health products. I've seen it go into animal feed. I've seen it go into compost and fertilizer. So that you're seeing a lot of different innovations that way. On the consumer level, I have to agree with Julie. It's so much about that consumer education piece and the role that even Julie plays in her world, right? Just being able to get that message out there. And I'll leave kind of one, as I was just thinking about your website, Julie. One of the things that came up to me, and I'm trying to remember where I read this, but there's an app being developed now that fridges are smart fridges. They should be able to essentially assess what food is sitting in your fridge and then come up with recipe ideas right on the screen of the fridge. Now it's super futuristic, but really cool. That's a great innovation and great use of some waste that might be sitting right in your own fridge.
Well, and maybe that's another way that that grocery stores. Someone had asked how grocery stores could help, and they see a lot of produce going through, you know, being discarded or being disposed of somehow. So, and I've talked to a couple organizations in the past about having people make preserves, you know, do pickles, do jams, and to distribute to families who could use them. So.
Yeah.
One
other space that I've seen food waste really going into, and I think this is just really interesting conversation too, is a lot of people probably don't know, but one of the world's biggest bug farms for feed production is actually in Balzac. It's called Enterra Feed, and they will take food waste from anybody, restaurants, from grocery stores, it doesn't matter. Their bugs need organic waste. And so that's an interesting way to repurpose that food waste, which then goes into aquaculture feed, so for fish. And then those fish in turn get back into our system, right? So, so many different ways to close that loop. Indoor fish farming is becoming a big thing in Western Canada. Most of them are quite quiet as they try to expand, but I can think of a shrimp farm and probably 3 different fish farms all within 50 kilometers of Calgary.
wow.
I think education is the key, as everyone said. For me, I'm talking about basically in the house. Also, by working with people who depend on a food bank, some of the food they get, they don't eat it really. However, when you get there and they hand over you something, you can't say no. So those food go to the waste because, again, of education. Also, education, even the charity who do school lunches, I think school lunch is going to continue. Okay. However, going to continue in another way, not the way it's been done before. Now it's going to come to the community again. You know, as we have, as you saw, little kitchen we have here, what children eat, then where children are. You know, we saw this connection between organizations and the recipients. Okay, and by competition, not working with those grassroots organizations, which we are very ignored, it turned out when it's a really emergency, which I assume that's when the charities were founded at the beginning, these grassroots are connected with people. It doesn't matter what you have if you don't know where need is. It's connecting needs with people. Again, it's educating people to get the right food they need, or educating them how to consume the food.
Yeah, I think Jean-Claude, you've nailed, you know, we've talked about the whole system, but at every point access becomes a challenge. How do we work with access? And then, you know, back to the point of even at the beginning where you said, you know, spaghetti, teaching around recipes and providing an understanding of what food might be available and what ethnic diversities are there around food consumption and the knowledge of what that might look like. We have a question from the audience that I think would be great for all of you, and it's from Dirk. And I think it really leads nicely to this conversation, but around what does a flourishing, resilient food system look like? It's a big question. I think each of you come from it from a different lens. So who would love to start on that one?
Sasha.
I didn't raise my hand because I kind of thought I was going to get voluntold on that. It is a big question. I think we'd be remiss to not think about the economic viability of any of this. At the end of the day, in order for us to be able to supply food in a charitable fashion, those in the supply chain need to be able to worry about themselves, or not have to worry about themselves as well, right? And so how viable everything is so important. And from a banking perspective, it's something I see all the time. It's like, well, why won't you get into this opportunity? Look at the impact it'll have. Well, at the end of the day, any financial institution, be it an investor or anybody, it can't just give money for the sake of giving it. It needs to make sure at least it balances itself, so it breaks even and can continue to run, right? Otherwise, you're just pumping it into that way. Doesn't mean we can't be looking at other sources of capital, but that I find is always an issue. Beyond the economic viability of a food system is 2 points. One, on Jean-Claude's point that came up around the need and figuring it out. One of the biggest issues in agriculture technology right now is that people have great ideas from a technology perspective, but do not understand the problem. And so they don't go down to the farmer and talk about what the problem is. Similar to Jean-Claude's point is we don't go to the person in need and they necessarily ask what exactly the problem is. We just hand them a gift card or here's a solution, take it. Right? That's not always working. So that communication channel, that has to change. And that's kind of builds into my second point around the silos of that supply chain. So the food supply chain, especially in Canada, was very heavily built on an export model. Get our product out to market because we make so much of it. And that allowed everybody to run in their own silos, grain, beef, produce, it didn't really matter. And so I think breaking down some of those barriers and having everybody communicate in more of an inclusive food supply chain is a big piece. And I mean, that's a big role that I play in my job today and personally is trying to connect that food ecosystem so we can understand each other's problems. Back to that company I cited earlier around food traceability, one of the biggest things that they saw was that these guys weren't talking to each other, so they didn't realize the duplication in effort. That duplication of effort reverts me back to the economic viability. If you're duplicating efforts, it's probably not that economical. But if you're more seamless with each other, you'd be surprised how much better and more efficient it is.
That's great. Sasha, I love, just before I send it over to you, Julie, this lens of what's the real problem we're solving. And for anyone that's here thinking about participating in our Disrupt-A-thon, that is in fact what we do in the Social Impact Lab, is going to the user and very human-centric is what's the real problem we're solving for. But when we're in a COVID, it's about quick response. And so I think that I'm very aware of that's what's happening in our city as well. Julie, did you want to go?
Yeah, and I think, when we talk about hunger issues, people are hungry now. We can't wait and reconvene next week and in 2 weeks. And so we sort of do need to come up with these quick solutions. And everything Sasha said about the production processing is a huge issue across Canada. We need more processors across the country. And then, distribution, becoming more self-reliant. I think this kind of ties into Yvonne's question, if I can kind of loop it in, because it's sort of a similar question. Is it not unrealistic to expect our largely urban population to produce their own food? And yes, we did see people baking sourdough and we're seeing people garden. And I think it's a matter of not being completely self-reliant, but taking that edge off and understanding that you can produce bread if you need to. You can grow a percentage of your food in your backyard, or maybe get to know a local farmer, local producer. I think even if we just look at what we buy from day to day and buy fewer imports and more locally grown food, even if it's Canada-wide, right? Even if it's peaches from Ontario versus kiwi from New Zealand. And I think we really need to ask why we can get a cucumber, from Israel when they're not growing in greenhouses here, but we can't get one up to our northern communities affordably. So there's a lot of big picture questions, but a lot of it I think happens right in our own communities. But I do want to put a pin in that and come back to the idea that we expect everyone to have this knowledge of what to do with whole ingredients and cook all their meals from scratch every day. And not everybody has the tools to do that, the time to do that. it's not just about education. It's about having access to kitchens, having access to childcare. That's a whole other conversation that I think needs to be addressed.
I will go back to Sasha's point. Everything we're talking about the hunger is, again, when we go to school, we don't find out why children are hungry. So, sometimes because they very good family, they don't have many choices as we do. They can't find those food they used to, and they haven't figured out what can replace them here. You find they cook every single food every day, and which kids who grew up here, they don't eat. So our solution is, how about removing stigma in those lunches? Basically, one day you take Angela to school for every kid to try. At the same time, introduce new food to these new families where they're gonna have more choices rather than dealing with the symptoms. Those organizations can basically focus on solving the root cause of, instead of treating symptoms. I think there's many things, and the cause of poverty is lack of access.
Can you say that again, Jean-Claude?
The cause of poverty is lack of access. It's not lack of money, it's lack of access. Can mean many things. Cause of hunger is lack of access, So if we can deal with the access and make people hungry, as Julie says, for now, let's deal with that. However, at the end, we're gonna sit down and say, okay, when this happen again, how can we be better?
Yeah. Julie, I was watching your body language.
Oh, and I keep touching my face. Yeah, access is huge. I mean, there are a lot of root causes, of course. Yeah, I'm looking at these questions, and are we going to be able to answer them without them disappearing? Because
we will.
To be missed. And I was thinking about Dash Mesh Culture Center up in Falcon Ridge. They have a big urban garden as well, and they've been feeding people throughout this pandemic. And if you go on Sunday afternoons, I believe they're out in their gardens and will teach people. So I think education is part of it, but also expecting people, who might not have the luxury of time and a well-equipped kitchen and garden space to grow their own food, to cook everything from scratch. A lot of this just comes down to money, and there's a lot of packaged food that is really cheap that's that you can make without having all the ingredients on hand, right? That you can just reheat, that you can feed your family with little time without having to have the right baking dishes or a whisk or all these tools. So yes, sorry, I got off track.
No, I'll add on to that. I've done a fair bit of analysis in consumer habits and consumer purchasing through financial recessions. And then we tried to kind of compare it to what happened here in the pandemic. And, one of the interesting things that we always see is that the intent to buy local and focus on some of what has traditionally been higher cost because of some of the local nature of its production. This isn't right across the board, but we've noticed this. Soon as we get into a pandemic or a recession or something like that, everybody still has that intent that we need to focus more locally, but we actually look at the buying habits and it still goes after the processed, the cheap, the canned, the whatever. And it's typically because it's what can my wallet afford? And not to take away from Jean-Claude's point, because it's not always about the money, it's the access and how we figure out that access piece. Absolutely. But it's just interesting insight for us as we looked at it. We still see even those who are in a capable position to support local in its best case, when it comes down to the wallet, they actually don't as much as you would think, right? And so much of that is necessary. We need those who can afford to support that local ecosystem, so the local ecosystem becomes more viable, and then it can allow access to so many more people.
Thanks for that, Sasha. Oh, Julie.
I was just going to say, and sorry, my dog is drinking loudly beside me. I think we have such a huge opportunity right now to rethink how we feed people at home, in institutional and temporary living settings, in schools. I pulled out this book just to give a quick plug to Joshna, Take Back the Tray. It's revolutionizing food in hospitals, schools, and other institutions. So anyone in this group is probably would be interested in her book. She's in Toronto. But how to engage our hospitality industry is huge. I mean, we're going to lose a significant percentage of restaurants and catering kitchens. We're starting to see them close already. As soon as that rent relief is up, I think in the fall, we're going to see another huge wave of closures. And I think they are in a really unique position to help feed people in an affordable way, as well as if we can reimagine how that works, how that funding structure works. And that's something that I've been trying to research and address through this, is how to direct some of those relief funds through restaurant kitchens to help them feed people at home in temporary living situations. And we've seen some examples of that across the country, but the two obstacles are funding and then access to the people who typically work with the agencies. So sort of making those connections, I think, is key. Mm-hmm. And that's part of building relationships within our communities.
Thanks, Julie, for that. I know we're at time, so what we're going to do is, just for those people that need to drop off, a reminder that the Disrupt-A-thon is live on Open City. If you're interested in participating in this Disrupt-A-thon as it relates to food and the food system, come to Open City, see what's happening, create a team. And if you're not interested in creating your own team, there are teams of people that are looking for individuals to participate. And then continue to follow us on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn, where we'll keep you updated on what's going on with these ideas and when they'll be available for a crowd voting. But if you want to hear the pitches, that will be next week on Wednesday. And we have panel experts from entrepreneurs and also from the food system that will be there providing some feedback to the teams that will be offering and sharing their ideas. So we are going to stay on for another 15 minutes, and we're going to answer more of these questions. And then those of you that are participating in the Disrupt-A-thon, Gabrielle will take you through everything that's happening next, and all the next steps and excitement that we've got going on for the next 5 days. So thank you for everyone that did join us. And for those that are staying, James and I are going to start to now walk through some of these additional questions, so that way we don't miss out. So if you are leaving, again, this will be on YouTube. We've recorded it, so you can go back and find the responses to these questions. Okay, well, we might as well just keep jumping in. James.
Yeah, well, I've seen a question with slightly different tack. Love to hear about how we can share information with people about available resources. Websites and social media are great, but for vulnerable people who do not have technology, how do we include them? This has been a huge learning during this pandemic. Now, Jean-Claude, I know with Soccer Without Boundaries, you provided laptops, did you not, to kids for school?
Yes, we did, and we're still looking for more. Again, I believe internet is going to be just like water and electricity. If we want basically people to be included in the inclusion piece, computer have to be there, and our communication has been door knocking. This is why I have these volunteers who go to 300 houses every week. It's not only that we have other things we do. We hand in homework for children, okay? When we go next week, we pick up those homeworks. Then we figure out what's going on. We know if we give them more food, they say, next time don't give us as much as this. This is how we've been basically communicating. Again, I will come back to grassroots organizations that nobody knew who they were. Again, because of the way system is set here, it's kind of top down, where you come to solve problems. And if you live in Africa, this is a problem why rich countries have been pumping money in Africa, but problem is still the same, okay? This is what we are doing with the charities here, with the people, where we like to solve problems, but nobody's going back and saying, no, we've been doing that for 50 years. What's going on? You know, we need to evaluate again how we do that, but communication, we need to introduce those new way of communication to people. Some people will not figure out, you know, and again, this is the focus for from here, where we're going after this pandemic. There's many things that this pandemic opened up that we used to think we're doing well. We figured out we have a way to go. Communication is the one thing which is, it's always to listen rather than coming and telling people. I feel that the funders, the government, and everyone, as the people are talking about systemic racism, we need a systemic liberation. That's how I call it.
Yeah, good. And I also see a question actually from Nancy, which says, I'm curious where the space is to talk about dignity and the right for all people to be able to purchase the food that they want to eat. Why aren't we questioning why we need a charitable food system at all? Lining up for food and being the recipient of food waste is only reserved for people who have less money, and this is not dignified. Anyone want to jump in on that?
I can jump on that again. We have a senior citizens. I didn't talk about it. Again, I will touch to Julie's point of restaurant where they play into this. So I have 10 senior citizens, okay? 4 of them, they cannot cook. They used to have a help before COVID. They did by themselves. Twice a week, we pick up food from their restaurant, basically from their culture, the food they eat, we deliver to them twice a week. For those who can still be cooking, every 2 weeks, we go to grocery store, we buy food for them, and we deliver food for them at home. So again, could be the system where those two things can work together. There is a restaurant which have a huge, we have a problem of nursing home have a horrible food. We now know, we didn't know before. Why can't restaurant actually jump in and take some of that role, you know? Why always, or why can't we find a way grocery store can fill in and help those poor people? But again, I believe those food system, they supposed to, you know, food bank is very important, you know. I don't really, I cannot see the way we can repress it, but we can change the way operate, okay? However, the senior citizens, we have a way to go. And I think restaurants have a role to play as we've been using both. And it's been amazing.
Yeah. There's another question as well, thank you. And there's another question that's sort of linked to that is around grocery providers, not just, you know, and restaurants. So how do we as organizations that are involved in food security know who, how, and when to reach out if there are needs? Grocers don't know about all the groups out there helping, and perhaps there is more that they can do if we as food providing organizations work more closely together and go to them so we can really effectively and efficiently support them to help us more. Again, let's figure out how to reduce competition among us so all the community members get support. Has anybody noticed where sort of organizations have grouped together, or, you know, maybe for profit food distributors or grocers have worked together to link the supply and the demand?
We have some partners. Right now, I'm working with the 3 churches, okay? the churches, they gave me a list of people. They used to help before COVID. I reach out, I say, okay, I know church are not, as you know, not working, you don't have resources. Where are vulnerable people you have? Okay, they send a list. So what we do is basically giving them food to deliver to those people. They have volunteers, they have everything, they connect to people. And also there is other organizations who are giving food. I can say like leftovers. There is a Icon for kids. So basically they reached out to us and say, you know, we have food here. Can you come and give to those who need it? So then those gift cards I get, instead of giving to people, some people will give gift card. That's another thing. Sometimes people need the food, you know. Again, when you give people food, you teach them also how to make food. Also, when you give food, you know for sure 100% they are going to cook the food, okay? So this is why I'm in favor of, yes, those organizations giving gift card, but it's good if there is a way those gift card can basically transform into the groceries, because some families need that encouragement. Again, diversity in the house, that's another thing. Because when you give someone a gift card, some families, yes, it's good independent to go and buy what they want. But when you think of children again, because we have example of the families who learn to cook rice, you know, if you give them gift card, they would not have, that they would have gone and just buy something they usually do. So, yes, we partner with those small group of people where basically they say, hey, we're not connected with people. We say, yeah, we connected with people. Again, I go, I say, okay, you connect to this group of people, would you do this? Okay, so this is how there's about 4 churches and 2 community organizations. Basically, we're working into that. Again, grassroots, not to be ignored, because this is people who are connected 24/7.
Cool.
I'll add to that. I think on both the questions, you know, around the dignity piece and gift cards. So I've been involved with this kind of on the community giving side of things, and the gift cards has been a really interesting debate. You know, there is an aspect of it that does give dignity, because I get to now go choose. I mean, we should still steer them. This is for a grocery store or whatnot, but the other piece of the gift card that's interesting for me as I look at the supply chain is really about the COVID issues, about how many hands are going to touch the food before it actually gets to the person, right? And the gift card kind of addresses that in some extent. And it's just hard. Like I know I Can for Kids and other organizations, where do I warehouse this stuff? What do I do with it? How do I get volunteers to help me go build food packs for brown bagging and stuff like that? We all have the volunteers, but we can't all show up because of, until a couple of weeks ago, we physically couldn't get together, right? And so just being able to adapt really quickly. And then the other piece for that dignity side of things is, how do we take our food waste and add value to it and have a finished product that doesn't do the dignity thing? I'm not one to profess I'm a great cook on this, but I know I can use peppers that are softer. I know I can use tomatoes that are softer or whatnot to make a different product. And so how do we work with restaurants or food producers to make sure that that food supply chain actually utilizes that for value add? Always cautious of saying this, but even, you know, expiry dates and stuff like that, it's a misconception on the consumer more broadly that that expiry date is a not good anymore date. It's not what it is. It's a recommendation. This is, we think it's going to be good to hear. It could be on both sides of that line. That's a consumer education piece, but that's the other piece. And so it's unfortunate that it comes down to dignity. It's not really that. This is still good food. It's just that somebody put an arbitrary date, it almost feels like, and then we get that association. So just mindful of that education piece, that our food and the quality of the food that we produce here can go so much further than it does.
Sure. Julie, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I think I need to backtrack a bunch too. Agreed, the best before versus, yeah, it's not poisonous after. And that contributes to a lot of food waste at home. But to go back to that idea of working together and collaboration, I think, is key in all this. I get really discouraged when I hear from organizations that, you know, there isn't room for small grassroots community groups to address hunger needs in their communities. I think we need to work together. And so what's happened with the lunches that I've been involved with, we have Devour Catering, their kitchen has been activated now, but you know, it's a collaborative effort between Megan and Tanya, the teachers in Bowness, who have done a GoFundMe. We have some funding from Brown Bagging It. We're getting frozen meals and cookies and muffins from Meals on Wheels. We got a grant from Breakfast Clubs of Canada. And I think we should be able to work together because people in their communities have access. These teachers know where the kids are. They have relationships with their school communities. And that's key, even for the large organizations. They need to reach the right people. So I think it's really important that we have those relationships, not only between, you know, the growers and the producers and the grocery stores, the distributors, the chefs in the restaurants who have kitchens that are underutilized, that are trying to keep themselves afloat. You know, and I think it's really important for those members of our community, those small independent restaurants with kitchens, with chefs, who it's their life work to feed people, to be part of that solution. So to figure out ways for us to all work together, whether it's financially, whether it's access to the people who need it, whether it's growing, whether it's preparing and consuming, we're all part of it. And to approach it from this perspective of competition, I think is harmful. And we just really need to look at opportunities to work together to feed our communities.
I actually want to build off that point, Julie, because that's such a, like that collaboration piece, and I meant to mention this, but so I often deal in two different areas. I deal with large corporate companies trying to figure out how to attract that innovation through, and then also the government funding side of this. And one of the things that's unanimous is if I've got 1,000 people coming at me, nothing gets done. If 1,000 people come on one voice and decide what their purpose is, and they then come to me with that one voice, action is almost immediate right after. This happens on the government side. This happens on industry side. So when I hear about the big grocery retailers and something like that not knowing everybody that's out there, that's because the collective voice hasn't worked well together, in my opinion. And again, it's competitive in nature. There's a funding model to this that unfortunately makes it competitive. Nobody's denying that, but I think, you know, God, to use the cliche of that, you know, the tide raises all ships. That's really what this is about. I know that's a cliche, especially in this space, but that's so important in food, in the supply chain of food, let alone for the social impact aspect. So I just want to reinforce that. Yeah,
that's fantastic. And that's a very important message to finish this with, actually, I think. So we've come to time now. We've dealt with as many of the questions as we can. We're going to need to move on and talk about the Disrupt-A-thon. How do you want to handle that, Monique?
So what we'll do is we've got a few extra slides that we'll run through. And thanks to everyone who's staying on the line. And I also want to just thank our guests, obviously Julie, Sasha, and Claude, for spending so much time with us. It's been invaluable, truly. And I know our team is also working on some ideas. And so lots of wheels are turning. The weekend's going to be busy.